Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. And if you're in the here and now, you're welcome as well. This is Grant Cameron, and I have Christmas time today. I'm so excited about this interview. I've been setting it up for a couple of months. Today, I have Joanne Helfrich on. And when I heard her talk, I heard a couple of interviews she did, and she does something that my assistant Desta Barnaby does, and I've got Desta here today, and they both do the same thing. And I went, wow, because when Desta was doing this many years ago, when I first met her, I would say, ask him this, ask him that, and it's like because she was doing this, and she told me how she did it. So we're going to get in a little bit today about that. But we're going to talk about channeling, which I basically maintain is where we got to go. I started in UFOs in 1975, and people can look at all the lights in the sky they want, stuff flying around, count the colors, count the patterns or whatever they think is going on. But it's not until you actually talk to somebody who's talking to the intelligence that you're ever going to learn what's going on. So in the last couple of years, I've spent almost all my time trying to find people who are able to, whatever you want to call it, pierce the veil, get inside. And the idea is that everything is there, everything is available. And there are certain people who are able to turn off the left brain and cut the noise out and get the signal. And we have, I think, one of the best ones today. Joanne, welcome. And
Thank
I'm
you.
so honored to have you on. And I think people are just going to be fascinated with your stories. And you also have a new book, which you've been sort of promoting, and we're going to talk about that, which we've actually written about this guy. So I'm so excited to have you on. Thank you for joining
Yeah.
me and sharing your incredible story of channeling and contact with all sorts of people.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Beautiful. And welcome to Desta. I will maybe start with Joanne to describe both Desta's much more well read than I am, but we both are quite familiar with Seth, Jane Roberts. So let's go through the story of your how this thing all began for you, because you're not really sort of you didn't were like a psychic as a kid or anything like that. That you sort of developed this talent, which would sort of indicate that maybe anybody can develop this talent if they go through the work that you
Mm.
did. Is that right?
Uh, that's right. Are you talking to me or
Yes.
Desta?
Yes.
Okay.
No, you.
I know Desta has her own story too. So no, there was nothing really remarkable about me as far as psychic ability. I did though have an experience when I was no more than 5 years old, because I remember exactly where I was standing, and it was in the kitchen of the home in New York where my family lived. And all of a sudden, things just sort of stopped for me. And I thought, how did all this get here? Like, who am I? Is everyone else real? Does anyone else exist besides me? And it's just so funny to hear, that a 5-year-old would have these ideas, but I imagine many of them do, and we just don't know about it. No one ever asked me something like that. So it wasn't until, and I kind of floundered around, not knowing where to go with all of these existential questions. I tried taking a philosophy class. It wasn't what I had hoped. And so it wasn't until 1985 that I discovered the Seth material channeled by Jane Roberts. For those who aren't aware of it, she channeled a non-physical personality named Seth. She started in 1963, and she did that until her death in 1984. Her husband, Rob, was a large part of the phenomenon, and he wrote every word down. Seth dictated many books, verbatim, chapter headings, punctuation, everything. Rob added notes to present their human side of the whole phenomenon, because there were very few people doing anything like it, except for Edgar Cayce and maybe few others. So she really, in the Seth material, brought the idea of channeling to the mainstream more than any other things. And they wrote about 40 books. Jane was an author in her own right, science fiction, poetry, and so on. It wasn't until I was in my 20s that I discovered the book Seth Speaks, which is a great introductory book for anyone interested in exploring the Seth phenomenon. And there are many books, but there's some good starter books, and that's a good one. It's very accessible. I found it and I I read it and I said, oh yeah, this is what I've been thinking, what I had been intuiting about reality sort of all along. I mean, I didn't know all of it, but I put into words the things that I had been thinking about. And I was curious about it and answered a lot of questions, and it gave me more questions. And then a couple years later, I met Paul Helfrich, who I would eventually marry. But it was so funny because, and it was like our third date or so, Paul sort of confessed that he had read all the Seth material like twice. And you didn't, for a long time, people have sort of been in the closet about reading this kind of material. And so we, of course, had this instant connection, and we went on to go to Seth conferences and actually ended up holding Seth conferences and an online forum. So we had about 1,000 people on an online forum that Paul ran. So he really became an expert at it. We, at the Seth material, answering questions and so on. We came out to California to be close to another channeling phenomenon that seemed to be, well, we have reason to believe that he really was continuing the Seth material and a kind of lineage. Elias, who is channeled by Mary Ennis, and another one, really a great channeler these days, is Chris, who is channeled by Serge Granbois in Canada. So we got involved with these. We came out to be close to the phenomenon. And if anyone gets the opportunity to get in on the beginning stages of any channeled work, do it, because it is such a fulfilling experience. We did a lot of exercises to develop our own inner senses. He was always encouraging about that. And we were always discerning, and you have to be discerning. If someone says that they're an infallible source, don't continue. But if you have someone who's doing their best to get these giant gobs of information through a straw, through a channeler, and find words for concepts that don't even exist yet, get close to it and do that. And so we had a lot of fun with it. There was a lot of irreverence that went along with it, our friends. And so, my own development really had a lot to do with this sort of milieu that we found ourselves in. And one of the things that was especially important was the idea of intent. And Seth introduced it in one of his early books, and he gave a ninefold typology to help people connect with their intent in life, their soul's design for expression, what we come in with that we want to experience and express. And it was super helpful for people to find out what these things were. And Elias was not a lot of it happened with the Seth material. It was sort of like a small blurb in one of the books, but with the Elias information, it really expanded on that, and it really helped a lot of people. And I was absolutely taken by the intent information, but the only way that we could really find out what someone's intent was to go to Elias and ask. And so we tried to create our own instrument. We couldn't do that. And finally I said, I'd really like to do little readings for people to find out, help them find out what their intent is. So I went home after a conference, Ken Wilber conference, actually. And because my husband and I were studying Ken Wilber, we were studying Dive Back, we were learning about behavioral psychology, so we could, which was super helpful. And so I got out my Ouija board. I amended it with 9 colored dots to represent the 9 families of consciousness or families of intent. They were called different things, but they were all the same things, all spelled exactly the same ways, unique names for each of these 9 families of intent. And so I sat down at this lifeless Ouija board for about 10 days because I'd never even been good at Ouija board, and especially by myself. And so I sat there, and eventually I sort of started to lighten up, and then the things started moving, right? And so I was able to sort of squeeze out some intent information for people and then there were also, good morning, good night, and then words started coming out, and then paragraphs, and then finally it was, Ouija, write a lot of words, Ouija hand, write a lot of words. And during that time, Rose, who described herself, and there's no gender or multi-genders in that world, so we were especially forced to use pronouns at that time. So she described herself as sort of a feminine energy, hence the her, and an energy personality essence, like Seth had described himself too. So she encouraged me to sit down at a computer and try to autotype. And so I did, and so I sat down at the keyboard, and I was really apprehensive because I had seen a movie when I was a kid, um, of a pianist who gets his hand cut off and then comes back. The hand comes back to avenge avenge his murder, and so like disembodied hands were like scary to me, but that's what it felt like, and my hands sort of just like it was like she was teaching me how to type for the first time. My hands went across the QWERTY keyboard in order of each of the lines of text. And so that introduced me to auto typing. The next day, I was able to air type. I'm sort of like obsessive. I type in my head, kind of. And so now I have the ability to speak with Rose and other non-physical personalities through my hands. And that's how I can have conversations with them, which helps, I can do it anywhere. I don't need a keyboard. So that's how I started, that's how I found my ability to channel.
Beautiful. Now, one question, then I'm going to go to Desta.
Mhm.
In terms of the Ouija board, we're doing a chapter in this upcoming books. There's actually two books on Ouija boards, and of course, you know what the criticism is. There's the
Mhm.
devils in the Ouija board. So is the Ouija board a tool, and you used it because Seth did the same thing. Jane Roberts used that as
Mm.
well. That she started with that, and suddenly she could pick it up, and before the message even came across the board, she could pick up the message. Is that sort
Yeah.
of the way it works with you, that it's a tool and that they get you started like a little kid in kindergarten, and then they develop you along where you don't need the board anymore?
Yeah, I don't remember if it was exactly because that Rose, I'm sorry, that Jane had done it, but it felt like the right thing to do. I wasn't really sure where to start. So having a board in front of you that's kind of solid and has certain boundaries on it, I would recommend that. And yeah, I mean, there are, I really dislike all of the hype against these tools of divination and all the fear. I did have, and I think that it is worth considering that sometimes um, playful or immature spirits or, can come through. I had that experience once while I was just getting started, and I told it to, I don't know if I can curse on this
Yeah,
program,
yeah, sure. Yeah.
but I just said, fuck off. And they did, and that was the end of it, and it was sort of like, um, now whenever I feel like something's coming through that's a little bit testy, I'll just remind myself to go a little deeper, a little higher, than and above that. I'm not a big subscriber to above and below. I think more of it is wider and narrower focuses. Neither of them is better or worse. So that's sort of like how I think about it. I was raised Catholic, so I this whole sky god, earth goddess thing has been problematic, for so long that I don't position myself that way in my thinking. So
Now, the channeler Paul Selleck will talk about co-resonance. This is that a part of the thing? Whatever you take from the divine and put into darkness will drag you into the darkness with it. The idea that
mm,
if you're using a divination tool, whatever it is, that your resonance, your mindset when you go in there is important to what you're going to
mm.
pick up.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with that. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, now Desta, you tell your story about how you learned to do the the channeling, and tell us who you believe that you're interacting with.
Well, my beginning in channeling, I guess, I was also a dowser before I was channeling, and for dowsing, I was a chart dowser. And so there's a lot of, kind of like a Ouija board, right? It's just like an A to Z half circle, and you can douse out the same thing. You can just douse out, say like whoever you're connecting to, you know, can you give me a message? Can you give me a sentence? Did you have any messages for me or whatever? And I wasn't really taking that, because when I was doing that, I was solely dowsing. So I wasn't even considering that had anything to do with channeling or a Ouija board, or I was just like, it was just a dowsing, you know, form for me when I was doing that. But my channeling kind of started, I don't even remember when the time frame was, but say around 2015 or something. And I just happened to be taking, I was taking the QHHT course, the quantum healing hypnosis technique course, where you learn how to put people under, and how to, the only reason I took it is because I couldn't get regressed. I couldn't be hypnotized. And so I wanted to figure out the like loophole of how to get difficult people to put down, how to get them down, because I was really interested in Dolores Cannon's ability to be able to talk to people's higher selves. I thought that was, I didn't even care about the past life part. I just thought, like, wow, you can actually talk to the person's higher self, right? Like, I want to be able to talk to my own higher self. So I thought I'll take the course and then figure out how to try and do it myself, even though they never say that that's something that you can learn in the course. I just thought I would at least try and figure out how to put difficult, you know, hard to hypnotize people down, so I could try doing it to myself. And at the same time, I was taking a different course on like astral travel or lucid dreaming. And in that course, I had spent weeks in bed, like at night, and part of that training is like a body, mind awake, body asleep. And so you kind of try to get out of your body in an astral travel or out of body experience. Sorry if I said lucid dreaming, I didn't mean lucid. I meant out of body experience or astral travel. You try and get out of your body, roll out of your body once your body paralyzes itself and it's time to go to sleep. So you kind of learn to keep yourself awake while your body is paralyzing itself, which normally would then mean you can go and you start sleeping. But this way, you're supposed to keep your mind awake, let your body be paralyzed, and then you're supposed to be able to roll out of your body. So, and I could never do it. But while I was trying to do it, and I was like in this body paralyzed, so that's like, you know, when a lot of people say they see the hag come and she's trying to choke you, and there's all these horrible things happening in the room. I actually never had any of those experiences. I was just looking around and trying to roll out of my body, and I couldn't. So it was like kind of boring, because I did it every night and I would do it every day. They teach you to like try and do it for an hour, an afternoon nap. So you could just do it multiple times. And I was so bored. I was just like, damn, it's not working again. And then I just thought one time, like, I'm taking this QHHT thing and you're supposed to be able to talk to your higher self. So I just started thinking, like, since I was so relaxed, in such a relaxed state, my body was paralyzed, I was just sitting there, my mind was completely empty and void. And I just started thinking, like, oh, I just wonder if I could, you know, talk to my higher self here. Like, I wonder how you do it, because you didn't learn that. And so I just kind of like started asking questions and getting answers. And I started then not even trying to roll out of my body when I was doing this at night, because I was having so much fun getting all these answers, asking all these questions, getting all these answers. But eventually what would happen is that, of course, you would fall asleep, and then I'd wake up in the morning and I couldn't really remember what happened. I remember it was a crazy experience, and I remember how I couldn't believe that it felt like the second I asked a question, I would get the answer, and it felt like everything was like, you know, so the information was just, you know, infinite and given at the exact moment that I wanted it. But I couldn't figure out how to remember it in the morning. So I'd try all night, like try and remember. And for like, you know, a month or whatever, it was very difficult. I could only remember one little part, even though I'd spent hours talking, having this conversation. And then eventually, I had a couple other strange things happen, I guess, that might have helped it out. But I, just like you were saying, Joanne, started asking questions and then writing it down, handwriting it down. So then I would be awake in the day and just try and get to that like meditative state instead of doing the astral travel thing when I was asleep at night. I would just try sitting there, lowering my, you know, brain waves, kind of getting into that theta state, asking a question, and then opening my eyes a tiny little bit and then writing down one sentence, one word at a time. And I did that for a long time, 6 months or maybe even a year, until I had to, like, I'm a pretty good typist. I took a medical transcriptionist course. We had to do 70 words a minute. So I'm very good at, you know, quick typer. So then eventually one day I just thought, why don't I just, you know, go into the state, leave my hands on the keyboard, and then try and ask these questions. And then maybe I'll be able to write even faster and get more information in a night. And yeah, and then that's really how it started. I was just able to type without even opening my eyes. So it like took me out of the state a little bit less. And I was just in it more. And then I would find, after doing that for 6 months or a year, I would find that I was like completely falling asleep and waking up and not even knowing how much typing I had done and not even really realizing what had happened. But then just like being so tired, I would just wake up and kind of look and shut the computer down and go to sleep. And it would take a couple of days once in a while before I'd go back over it, and I would go like, I don't even remember writing half of this stuff. I've never even heard of some of the words or some of the concepts or whatever. And yeah, so that's how I did it.
Just add the one thing about the help you got. That's the weirdest part of the story.
Well, yeah, that's a weird part. So I had a couple of weird things happen, but one of them was again, because I was getting into the practice of doing these deep meditations, and sometimes it was when I was actually asleep at night. Sometimes I was just doing meditations. So I was doing a meditation at one point in bed, but before I was like getting ready to go to sleep, kind of thing. And I had an experience where I had like this being. So it came 2 different times and gave me 2 different messages or whatever. But one of the times it came, I was like sitting at one of those school desks where the, you know, the wooden part of the desk is attached, like in elementary school. I don't know if they still do that, but you know, like an old school desk. I was sitting at this desk and there was no one else in the classroom, but I was in this classroom and there was this thing standing behind me with his like hand on my shoulder. And I didn't really understand where I was, but I was, you know, asking questions and very clearly being taught, you know, something by it. And again, I was like in the mind frame where like, remember this, because you're not writing it down. So remember what's happening. But I couldn't really remember all of what was happening. But the being was this, like, I didn't hardly see him. I felt his presence. I knew what it looked like. I knew the, you know, vibe of him or whatever. I knew everything that was happening, him communicating, but he was holding onto my shoulder, but in a different version of a different episode of this that I had with him. I saw him and he looked like a regular gray, I guess, but he had like a swirling, like shining, I don't even know how to say it, like plasma kind of sparkly, shiny, like body. So it was kind of like the universe maybe, and like zillions of stars turning around his body. I couldn't tell if it was a shimmer of his skin or like stars. I couldn't really tell what it was, but it was like a gray looking being that just happened to be a very like universal, like, I don't know, like being from somewhere else that was just kind of saying like, I'm going to help. Like I was having all these problems with trying to get into this theta state. So I was like, you know, not knowing that I could talk to something in the universe. I was just kind of like talking to the universe, like, how the hell do you get into this theta state? I don't even get it. You know, like, help me. How am I supposed to get out of my body? And all this stuff happened within the same very short amount of time. And then the being came back that time and then gave me a whole, actually showed me how to do it, showed my brain, or let me see what my brain felt like when they took my thoughts away, so I would recognize it and then know how to be able to talk to myself. And so I don't know what the real spur was that made me be able to start doing the channeling, if it was that being or just practicing so much or being so, you know, upset about it and calling out to the universe. But that time when I did the call out to the universe, that sparkly thing came back. And it was like, oh, you want to know how to get to theta? I'll show you how to get to theta. And it was a whole thing where the main part of it was that after that, I could get like in a second, I could go to theta. I knew exactly what it felt like. I could channel right away. I knew exactly what it felt like, and I knew when I wasn't there, and I knew when I was there, and it was not comparable to any other time I had ever meditated or been in any kind of these states before. It was a complete absence of thought, feeling, my feelings. It was like just a complete separation, like how they say, even in Dolores Cannon's, like when you're regressing someone, you take them out of the picture. You tell their left brain kind of like go sit in the corner and have a coffee. That's what Dolores Cannon says. And that's what it felt like. Myself was removed from the whole situation, and it was just a like an empty, completely empty, peaceful nothingness state. And in that state, if I just asked any question, I could get the answers for it. It felt like I was, that was like the state to get the connections.
Okay, now name the two books that you wrote for people who might want to get the answers to that you got for these because you pose all these different questions through two books. So mention that, and then we'll get to back to Joanne, and we'll get into this interesting talk with the dead people.
I'll link my two books. They're available on Amazon. They're on It's All Connected Publishing. They're both channeled messages books, and there's not a lot that I actually write in them. It's just the verbatim messages that I channeled. That, of course, you were the one that helped me, that spurred me on to be able to publish those books, because I wasn't going to. But it's just books of just the messages.
Yeah, and they're very, very
I
interesting.
can look at.
Yeah, beautiful. And I remember you did the one last thing. You mentioned this thing about the basic message is always this oneness thing that you said you had to capitalize it every time. That you remembered that this was a big part. You didn't really remember what you were typing, but you knew it was oneness because you had to capitalize all the time. This oneness thing that they kept talking about.
Yeah, it's like I could tell because I've watched some of your videos, Joanne, as well, that you have the same kind of thing, where it's like when I'm typing, they're not specific for me. They're not specifically typing for me. I listen and I translate the thoughts and the feelings of this huge amount of information, and I'm just translating it and trying to put it in English. But what they did a lot in the beginning is if I would type something and I spelt it wrong, like, because they say the one or all a lot, and they always wanted, the one, meaning like our oneness or source or whatever, they always wanted that capitalized. And the only reason I knew that is because as I was typing the one, I would always have to backtrack and capitalize the one. And same with all, like when they're talking about all of everyone, again, like the oneness feeling, the oneness, the O was always capitalized on the oneness, and the all was all capitalized, which is like, I don't know. And it's funny because the years since then, I've seen other people do similar things, but I'd never known that anyone did anything like that. So I think it's just a similar vibe that other channelers are connecting to, and they must be getting the same message where it's like, that's like a big thing. It's just like how some people's, religious people would obviously capitalize G for God, but some people don't, like the small G for God or the big G for God. This is like always the big O for one, or oneness, capital S for source, and all is like A, capital L, capital L. I always just thought that was really weird. But if I would ever do it not like that and just spell it, they would just be like, no, it's like a capital O. And I always thought that was so weird, but I kind of got it after a while. But
yeah, I know. I do the same thing. I type very much letter by letter. And if I don't do something correctly, if I don't get it right, I'll find that I can't proceed with the next word. I've got to, go back a little bit and see what I did wrong. And, the capitalization is really to help distinguish, between like self and self, the small s and the greater self, so it's a sort of a shortcut, so that's where I see it too. It's so funny, Desta, because I've never heard anyone else say that they had a hard time remembering communications or conversations that they had with their greater selves when in state. Because I've said that to people too, and they really can't, identify, but it's so true. I too have these great conversations. I get all this wonderful information and then I can't remember afterwards because we're in a different state, right? And just, bringing it back. That's what it's all about. That's where the work is really, I think. So, oh, good for you. That's wonderful that you're doing that. And, I would also posit that while you were dowsing, you were channeling, in your own way. When Rose started talking about intent, these 9 families and all, she sort of changed the definition of channeling to be one's template for expression, right? Our soul's designed for expression. And that channeling is basically taking inner information and accurately expressing it, right? Accurately, not acting out, not doing it, but pulling it out and channeling these 9 families of intent, because there are sports people on the intent, and there are ballerinas, and there are models, and there are airplane navigators, and every person in our definition channels once they're able to find that thing. And so we hear about sports people who are able to get in the zone and perform these superhuman feats, right? So what the intent information does is help people connect with what's special about them, that connection with source, and how they can have fun and perhaps even be of service expressing that thing. And in fact, I just want to mention that there's one in particular in which people holding this specific intent, and by the way, these aren't ways to put people in boxes. This is a rainbow of infinite variations. We have all of them in us, just some to other degree. But there's one in particular that are born with a certain proclivity for connecting with extraterrestrials, other dimensional beings, and things like that. And so, I would suspect that all 3 of us have strong, family or alignment, with that particular family. So it's interesting that we're gathered here and talking about this. So thanks.
Beautiful. Now you move on with you start to do it, but then you start this very unique thing. You start interacting with dead people who want to write books and they want to get their message out. Can you go through that, how that all came about? And then your main book that you, with the, I think 20 people that come to you and they help you compose this book. Go through that.
Okay, so Rose is very wide energy, who says that she has had no physical lifetimes, but she's connected with millions of people who have lifetimes. So she has a lot of information. And so when I was learning how to channel her, I was also experimenting with connecting with some people. Like, for example, I watched a movie with a bio about Ayn Rand, the Russian American writer. And I just felt, when you read a book or you see something about someone and you just connect with them and you feel like, oh my, I really wish I could talk to them. Well, that's what I did. I sat down and it seemed to be her coming through, but I wasn't confident enough to really, hang my hat on it or tell anyone really, except my husband. I did have, I was doing private sessions at the time, and I had a client who asked me to speak with her mother, who I didn't know was alive or not. And so Rose is coming through, and I'm a conscious channeler. Rose is coming through and giving her information. I'm thinking, boy, I sure hope this is her. I didn't know until after the session that it did hit the mark. So she really did believe, based on what Rose had told her, that it was. So I really didn't do much with it until Anthony Bourdain passed in 2018. And I was bereft, as a lot of people were, because here was someone who seemed to have every reason to live, and he took his own life. So I thought, well, you know what? Damn it, I'm going to try to find out more about this from him. And so I did a transcript, I posted it on my blog, and people read it and they said, yeah, this really seems like the real deal. I wasn't, pursuing it any further until almost 2 years later, in the middle of the night, I just had the random feeling that I wanted to speak with Hunter S. Thompson, who is an American novelist and a favorite of mine. I see you smiling, Desta. Maybe you love him as much as I do. So I did. I got up and wow, it sure sounded like him too. So this was April of 2020, and things were starting to shut down for COVID. And our nephew and his dog would come over on weekends for dinner. Otherwise, we weren't really seeing anybody. It was a great opportunity to say, you know what, I'm going to try to talk to more people. And so it became sort of like an after dinner entertainment thing, like, guess who I talked to this week, And I would read it to them and they'd say, yeah, that sounds pretty good. That sounds pretty good. And so after a few of those, talked again to Ayn Rand. There were about 3, and Ayn said, well, Hunter would like to talk to you again. And so I went back and talked to Hunter, and I thought, wow, this is really interesting. And Hunter said, well, there are other people who would like to talk to you too. And so, you go in thinking, oh, these people don't know me, they probably don't have any time, why should I, bother them, like maybe they're enjoying heaven and don't need to talk to me. Well, it turns out they do have an interest in talking to us, right? And which was mind blowing, And so I continued and I talked to Reverend Martin Luther King and I talked to Harriet Tubman, and then it occurred to me that wow, this is not just after dinner entertainment. You know, if it is true that I have the ability to talk to anyone who's dead, uh, all of a sudden that's a big responsibility, right? What am I going to ask them? And how can they be helpful? So I set the intention. I said, okay, it's going to be a book. And I'm going to ask them to give us information about whatever they would like about their past lives, their not past lives, but their physical lives, their after physical lives, and any wisdom they would like to share with us. And I would like a committee to be formed to make sure that everything comes out in an order that provides a good reading experience for the reader. Because I didn't want to have a whole bunch of things to have to that are all wonderful, to have to edit, or find order for, right? And so that's what happened. And all 20 of the authors that came through that year continued certain themes. It does have a certain, they're all different, and they all sound, according to an expert, the way that they're supposed to sound as writers. But they all are different, but it's a cohesive story that they have. And sometimes they pick up on other things that people have said. Sometimes they even refer to some of the other authors that have talked already. And all I did was add notes at the beginning, at the end. At some of the end. Sometimes I ask questions too, not often, but I sometimes ask questions of them. Just to add the narrative about what was going on in the world. There was a lot going on with Black Lives Matter and other really earth-shaking things having to do with COVID, to put them in the context and to explain what was going on with me, because I was just trying to figure it out as I went along. So that's the whole, it got the whole story of the creation of it too.
You had Professor Lance Butler. You on your website you have a video of him talking, and he's I guess you're a language expert and knows
Yes.
all the people except for Harrison. I think he said, well, I didn't know Harrison, the Beatles. I didn't know his writing, but the others I know. And he basically backs up the fact that your writing is actually, you're either a very good you're a researcher who researched these people's writing, or you're this is legitimate. So that's pretty interesting. You mentioned the editing, and when I look at channelers, for example, you probably know that Paul Selleck has done whatever 12 books or whatever, and in each book there's only been 2 edits, 2 words that are changed. And that's what I've noticed. I always make this challenge to people that if you think you can channel, come and see if you can fool me. And this idea that you don't edit. Do you edit anything, or does it come out completely clean in terms of language? Because you'll see, if you transcribe like a YouTube video, you'll see people stringing stuff together and stuff. And when you get channel material, it's completely clean. It's like there's no, hesitations. There's no ums and ahs. So is that how it works for you, where it's coming?
Yeah,
clean?
it is. It's messy when it comes out, because when I when I type, it'll be like, I'll spell everything wrong. I don't go
Yeah.
back and correct it because I'm in state and I don't want to get out of it. So it's ugly. It's a little ugly when it comes out, but it is, the way it is. And, occasionally I might have a hiccup, but that's about it. And, the only thing I took out a couple of things that were deeply personal that they said to me that I didn't want in the book. But
Yeah,
other
you
than
you
that,
mentioned that
it
in
was a
other
pretty
interviews.
clean
Yeah.
transmission. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was
And
harder to write my own stuff, much harder to write my own stuff. That was hard. The rest was easy because they wrote
so,
it.
so my question would be, I've always thought about this idea that, now we're sort of getting more evolved and we have this idea in the new book, I do this whole chapter on time and space. Is there such a thing as time and space? And you
Mhm.
probably get that. So my question would be, where are these people? Are they within us, or is it all one thing? Is it all here and now? Is there a heaven out there? How do they gather together? And then maybe get into the guy who chaired the book, the guy that was in charge of the whole thing. Go through that story. That's very interesting.
Yeah, that was a surprise. Um, so, gosh, those are a lot of questions, but let me see if so I'll start with the main themes. The main themes are that life is eternal, that we have many things to look forward to. There are certain habits and thoughts that'll help us in this life and beyond it because we go as us. And that's something that Seth said and Rose too, that we take our problems with us. So there's no reason to kill ourselves because it's not going to end our problems. We still have to deal with them, but there's healing. And they describe some of their healing journeys to get to this place that I would say, is their greater self. The way they describe it is that I'm speaking with their greater selves, as you said, Desta, so that is something that we share too. So, consciousness is primary. They do talk about God, and, they talk about it in terms of their beliefs when they were alive. So for example, we get a different account of God from Harriet Tubman than we do from Douglas Adams, who was an atheist, right? And Harriet was I should say Mrs. Tubman, as I call her, was a very devout Christian. So she said, for example, I use the term father because that's the God I had when physical. Right. So she's describing, she says that she died without sin, actually, because she was an angel while on the earth, And so she says the mention of the word him is so you can see how very strong my faith was, so strong that he is still guiding me. That's not to say somebody can't have a mother God or a chicken God. The God you have is yours alone. Without him or her or it, this would not suffice, this heaven. You will have a sense of your own kind of God. My God is still the Father. That's all. Douglas Adams says, you can still be an atheist and believe in the afterlife. The reason I say this is emotion is key to humanness. We love emotions so much that we take them with us when we die. This is why I say we are human, which is what makes us eternal. Emotions are eternal in a sense, and this relates to the notion I gave you about my ability to connect with the writer of this book. We share similar emotions, and I would add intent, and a sense of tuning into one another. So the emotions are an important part of this whole thing. And when I say I left as an atheist and am an atheist still, it's because who says anything is better than humanity? When humanity is at her best, of course. And why not share this information with others in ways that revoke the permissions for somebody to claim that God is the only one who is capable of doing such heavenly things?
Wow.
So he's talking to our own greater selves as we are human. There are other descriptions. Hunter S. Thompson's is so beautiful because, he was a journalist. And so he talks about needing credentials to where he got in, which is such a journalist thing to say. He got the credentials. Ayn Rand talks about she has a protocol that keeps me sane in the sense of constructing my realities with vigor rather than with some degree of chaos that I find irritating about this place. Hunter describes it as having different floors. that she is in a sense in the same place he is, but it's different. So they're aware of each other. Albert Einstein talks about, he talks about this kind of having permissions to get to different places, that there are different rules of consciousness in this huge space, that just like there are rules here, of gravity and, and those kinds of rules. That's what he talks about. I had someone say in a review, she read the book and she said, I didn't understand what Einstein was saying, so it must be right. So he describes things in scientific terms that way, that there are sort of areas of consciousness that he's exploring, and others are exploring too. I hope that answered your question. I'm not sure I did.
Yeah, I was, when you brought up Einstein, you sort of answered the question, but I was thinking, is it hard to talk to Einstein? I mean, or I guess he's doing the talking, but do you understand in terms of what he's saying?
No, I don't completely understand it. No, I don't. I can't claim that. No, I kind of get the idea intuitively, but I mean, is it understandable in this context? I don't even know if we can understand all of it that he's trying to communicate, with our brains.
And the people, are they, I think you've talked about this, that what they do there, are they smarter? Are they learning? Are they just enjoying doing the same thing they did here? Or what is the process there in terms of people that might, want to know what happens when you die? I mean, in terms of what you've learned, what can you tell them? And then I'll let Des ask a question or two.
Sure. So one of the things that the chairman of the board says about his experience is that he went through, and many of them talk about the process that they went through. In fact, there's one person that I've never heard of named John Barron, who was a slaver. And
John Barron was Donald Trump. You know that.
yeah, yeah, he was a terrible person. This John Barron. And so he talked about learning. He was redeemed when he went to the other side. He realized what a terrible person he had been. He found ways to redeem himself through acts of love and other lifetimes where he was able to, as you would say, karmically, make some things right, and that way. And so this chairman of the board, who it was the second to the last chapter, where he says, I've been directing this whole book all along. And the chairman of the board is Robin Williams. And he talks about how he was able to sort of move into his greater self because of all the personas that he was when he was physical. And so he sort of had this sort of expansiveness already that helped him sort of integrate them and move into this next phase. And so they're all, I think, talking, right, as their greater selves. And one of the things he says, and it's so funny, he says, I'm now something of an oversoul who was able to go so far in his healing that I incorporated massive amounts of energy, the kind of energy I had when I was in charge of the cocaine stash. I understand he talks to a lot of people, so that's
Wow.
great. Yeah.
Desta, have you got something you want to?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. Have you found that there's different levels where they're too far removed or something from humanity, where they're just like too busy, it's too hard to get a hold of them kind of thing because they're actually off doing something and can't be pulled away from it?
Gosh, that's such a great question. I have trouble with the people I know, like my mom and dad, because I feel like they're gone. I haven't been able to connect with them. But everyone I've talked to who's famous, and that could be my own, it's like a surgeon operating on his child kind of situation where it's just too close to me and I'm blocking it. Everyone, I've been able to talk to everyone. There's also a state that I go into called Rose 2, similar to Seth 2, and that it's sort of like almost like an alien, emotionless. And I don't even know if it's cool to use the word alien anymore. I know things are changing. But it's a more detached, let's say, from our emotions and So when she comes through, it's a different kind of vibe. But no, everyone has been reachable, or some form of them, some stage of them, maybe. Yeah.
And do they tell you that once they get to a certain point where they've learned enough or whatever, wherever they are, that they're going to come back and reincarnate down here again or somewhere else?
George Harrison talked about other lifetimes he has now that follow sort of the themes of his intent. Einstein could barely be kept down. Yeah, like he talks about exploring other dimensions now, which you would expect. I think Goethe might have also. I'd have to double check, but yeah, they can definitely explore other lifetimes. And Seth talked about when we die, we do have the opportunity to experience other probable selves, even of ourselves. And that's one of the things I think that's interesting about this information, is that, you know, we spin off these probable selves who take alternative paths that we can connect with, and they're still us. They're still us. As well as we can connect with our other lifetimes, or as they're called, focuses of attention, who are part of the same essence, who we can tune into, who might be in other worlds, invisible or visible worlds. And so I think there's maybe some stuff to unpack there if people haven't already, and I'd love to be part of the conversation if it's helpful, that these extraterrestrials are other lifetimes of ours that we're tuning into psychically. And so we're the ones having the chips put in, you know, and that is real. It is real, and it's happening to us. And so that's where it starts becoming subtle when you're talking about, you know, well, who is us? Who are we? And so it's sort of consonant, this alien phenomenon that's happening is very consonant with the stuff that has come out about Seth, from Seth and Rose and Elias and all of those, to help us identify with our greater selves. That includes other lifetimes and probable selves too. So yeah, we're doing that. We just don't remember it.
I read, I think, or listened to a podcast or something many, many years ago that I think it was maybe a book that came out that was trying to figure out that thought that there was cultural amounts of time that people would actually like be on the other side before they decided to reincarnate. Because the only part of the whole thing that I remember is in Japan, everyone seems to reincarnate after 70 Earth years. And so in the West, it's like longer, I think, and it's shorter out east. I can't really remember, but does that, like, have you heard anything about that there's a certain amount of time maybe that they want to be there or feel like being there, or before they have to be sent back, or it's their time or whatever to do something else, go somewhere?
I keep coming back to the idea of simultaneity of these lifetimes. So, and really just sort of trying to take the linear aspect out of the whole thing because of all of the problems that come with it, you know. People less deserving because they were doing things in another lifetime. And so they're kept in, you know, a caste maybe because of that, things like that. So I really am more strongly oriented towards considering things as experiences to have. And so, you know, like, for example, you could have a lifetime on either side of a civil war, you know, like fighting each other, and you're seeing both sides of it at the same time. I feel like that's the more the conversation that I'm interested in, because then we talk about our own connectedness, you know, more than the other scenario. That's the part that I'm interested in exploring. You know, I mean, it's just I think, you know, some of it is just cultural, and I don't know when, you know, people are able to. It could be in, you know, chunks of time like that, you know, but I just don't know.
Let me throw a question in there and then Desta, go back to Desta. In terms of this, you talk about the simultaneous lives, this idea that everything's happening here and now like a deck of cards. So it could be that you're interacting with, say, Einstein's source, but he's actually on Earth already, living another
Yeah, I
life. Is
think
that possible?
so.
Yeah. That and that's it sort of gives the explanation why so many people are Cleopatra, that they may
Yeah.
tap into Cleopatra's energy and believe they're actually Cleopatra, and they're just tapping into that energy that's there for anybody to tap into.
Yeah,
Because you
that's
hear a
right.
lot of
Yeah.
people talking to Einstein. Lots of people seem to be talking to him.
Yeah, and so we're them, in a way too, because the oneness, as you said, Desta, so we're part of that. And I try to encourage people to do as you were just suggesting, Grant, is sort of like tapping into that energy, Cleopatra energy, and using it rather than saying it's sort of a trap saying, well, I was Cleopatra in another lifetime. And so explains why my life is whatever this now. So there's not as much of a cause and effect there maybe as we might think. And so the fact that Cleopatra is alive in all of us, if we want her to be, I think that's a lovely idea. Yeah. And helpful because, it's an archetype too, right? So Jung talked about archetypes and that queenly archetype that we can tap into. I don't know enough about archetypes. Jung actually talks about them a little bit in his section, in his chapter. But they're very real.
And I
They're
wonder too about the, like you're saying, possibly archetypes, but I'm wondering too, how you said earlier that sometimes if you just feel like you have a really good connection to someone. So if you were interested in, I can't remember who the first author, I think you said you started channeling was, you watch a documentary on him and then you decided to sit down and see because you felt this connection. So
Mm.
that might be the reason that you could reach out and channel to the
Yeah.
person because you felt the connection. But I've always wondered this too about past lives, and especially the Cleopatra question, is because I wonder if a lot of people just identify with that archetype and then they can like maybe zone into her energy and the energy of that time, and then that makes them say, I think that I was her in a different life, when meanwhile they're really just doing exactly that kind of thing. You just like vibe with something and then you can kind of get information from that time, and it makes you, maybe feeds your belief in the fact that you were that person, but maybe you're just looking into that person's life. And then, because a lot of people want to be someone famous in one of their past lives, maybe then they just say they were them, when
And
meanwhile it was just connecting.
it may not be a very pleasant experience. It may not be, if you're really tapping into the real Cleopatra. I mean, how different is that from the Cleopatra, the legend, that we've been made to believe, right? So yeah, you're right. I mean, I feel like we can connect it's a matter of tone. And it was a little book that I did when I was experimenting called The Afterlife of J.D. Salinger. And I read a book and as you said, I really didn't want to put it down. I didn't want him to go away. And that's when my real first foray, I was thinking it was ordained, but it really was Salinger. And, and he said, anyone can do it too, but we've been convinced that we're not able to. So, yeah, so he's one. I mean, he was really reclusive too when he was physical. So he seems a lot more approachable now that he's dead, So I encourage people to try to talk to him, why not? If I can I feel like you said in the beginning, I feel like if I could do it, anyone can, because I don't feel like typically like a remarkable person in that respect. I think everyone can if they want to, but not everyone is called to, and that's fine. Everybody has their own way of channeling someone or something. Yeah. And they're
Jane
all around
Roberts,
us trying to be helpful
Mhm.
all the time.
did you talk to Jane Roberts at any point?
I did. Yeah. So she wrote the introduction and the last chapter of the book.
Oh wow! So
Yeah.
what's she
And
got to say?
she,
Was she pleased that you took on the task?
yeah, I think so. She said she wasn't sure if she wanted to do it at first. So I don't know what that's about, but she talks about her, but then she realized it would be kind of fun. And she's one of those, I mean, I imagine she's one of those people who just goes way out because that's how she was, when she was physical. But she said, she thought it would be fun. And she talks about how surprised she is to now be on the other side helping me write the book when she was the one in my shoes at the time. And she describes her healing experience as one of those going to one of those old-timey sanitariums where, you know, there's a lot of nature and kind people and all that I'm not sure they have them anymore, or what they call them, mental hospitals. Well, it wouldn't be a mental hospital. It would be a place of recovery. And so she that was her experience, and then because, you know, if we create a reality, you know, we go with all of those things that we want to do, like not Hunter, Anthony, you know, who had a drug problem, went into rehab. So
And you mentioned that they may even have the drug problem. I think you mentioned one that still may have the drug problem on the other side. So you can actually carry this stuff over, correct?
I think so, yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does your husband help out like Jane Roberts' husband? Like, what's your husband's role in all of this?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. So he's met in many ways my teacher, because he knows so much about the Seth information. And he actually wrote a book. It hasn't been published yet, but it is, he's found a way to distill the information down to one book. And he's been an educator, and he's just retired as of the day before yesterday.
Wow.
So he's going to be doing more of this kind of thing, hopefully more interviews and things. So we don't have children. This is sort of like our thing, you know, and we talk about the information all the time. And, you know, it really helps to have someone to talk to about this stuff and run things by people, especially if you're trying to make it practical, you know, not sort of a so what question, you know, like how does it, you know, help us, you know, in our lives. So we do that. And he has an online class available when we have a website called newworldview.com. And my Rose and my own work is at thewayofspirit.com. So he's totally supportive of this and has been a very grounding influence for me as we've, you know, figured it out together, really.
His book is on Seth.
It is. Yeah, it
Oh,
is.
maybe we can interview him because
Yeah,
there's not that
absolutely.
many people interviewing on Seth. It's such immense amount of material and information. You'd think that there would be like schools, you know, universities that would be teaching this, and it's sort of fallen by the
Yeah.
wayside. But as you said, with Seth Speaks, when you read that, you go like, wow. It's like,
Yeah. Well, we did develop an online class with our partner, Chris Johnson, and there is access to it on the newworldview.com site. So
okay,
people can sign up for that online
yeah, we'll
class
link it. I noticed that. Yeah, you have that class,
and
and
do
you do
more.
still do private readings.
Sometimes, yeah. And you can get information up on thewayofspirit.com. Yep.
Okay, I may take you up on that because I'm doing a book on death, and I want one just to see what happens with the one, just to see fascinating. Now let's, I guess, Desta, if you got any other questions, then we'll go to the big new book that
I just, I just have one last question. Are you reaching out to these people specifically? Like you said, Anthony Bourdain, you specifically reached out to, but are any of these people like being got by other spirit trying to say, you know, can, you know, introduce you to someone else and that's how you're talking to them? Or do you try and reach out first?
Do you mean like, did someone like that I talked to who's dead say, oh, this other person wants to talk to you? You know, it's weird. I can't say for sure, but I found out when I woke up in the middle of the night with Hunter S. Thompson, I didn't know that he was a real hero of Anthony Bourdain's, who I had channeled in the first chapter. So I'm wondering if that was some kind of like oh, you know, I think you ought to talk to Hunter because, you know, like, or we have similar intent or something. So no, that's the only time it might have happened that I can think of. That's a great question. Thanks.
no, I had a good question, and I forgot what it was. Let's go to the book that you just did. In the last interviews I heard you were hinting at it. So talk
Right.
about the new book.
So I didn't know how to follow up Afterlives. My friends thought I was going to just continue doing what I was doing and talking to different authors or maybe the same authors. And I wasn't sure I wanted to do that because I like pushing myself to see what else I can do. And I felt like I just couldn't improve on Afterlives. So I gave it about a year. I was thinking about it, and I thought, well, maybe what I could do is talk, like talk about some kind of themes that people haven't really explored yet. And how about sex, drugs, and rock and roll? Like, how do they like what how's spirit involved with those things, that we kind of like some people denigrate them culturally, but I never have. And I thought, well, maybe I'll take the, like the coolest, they're all cool, all the authors are cool, I love them all equally, but there's people who've had more than their share of sex, drugs, and rock and roll and afterlives. Hunter S. Thompson, George Harrison, Anthony Bourdain, and so I thought, well, maybe Douglas Adams, sure. Maybe I would just have them, like ask them, not have them, ask them to help. And then I thought, well, oh, like David Bowie, boy, he would make a great introduction. Like he could set the tone for the whole thing. I thought, oh, that was really good. And that lasted for a couple of months. I thought, wait a minute, like maybe just David Bowie would be good. And so I asked, and what came through seems to be a version of David named Starman. He calls himself Starman, which of course is, a really great song of David Bowie's, and he had so many. And for my English friend, it's Bowie, sorry. Um, but I had always wanted to write a rose book for teenagers because I feel like teenagers are the most underserved audience for good spiritual information. And that's what this book turned out to be. It's small, it's a graphic, it has a lot of graphics in it. And that wasn't my idea at all. It was Starman's, who talks as if he was David Bowie in his physical lifetime, and but has gone beyond to share what it's like on the other side. So, and just practical advice, like, how to make friends, how to find the things you love doing, how to listen to good music, how to do drugs safely, and things like that. And it talks about sex very frankly, like don't be so afraid of it, be careful, be respectful, etc. So I really love the book a lot, and it's a great opportunity to engage young people with these kinds of ideas and also listen to David Bowie music at the same time, because his music carries so much great informed spiritual, I would call it spiritual, it's just common sense, a lot of it, spiritual information, Starman, there's just so many songs that he has out there that really speak to our greater selves, right? And Starman was that, for him. So that is my fifth book, and possibly my last channeled book. I'm not sure. I'm moving more into fiction now, so we'll see what happens. I don't know. Anything can change.
Fiction. Well, I hope you do, because it's this idea that you're pulling stuff out of the field that is more accurate than the left brain. Everybody
Mm,
praises the left brain, rational analytical
mm.
mind, and it's just getting us down a rat hole. It doesn't. It's like
Yeah.
thinks it knows everything and it doesn't really know anything when you start talking to channel people. How long did it take to do the Bowie book?
Oh, just probably a matter of weeks.
Wow.
Yeah. They don't take long. They just pour out of me.
It makes sense because we have, and this is a crossover question here. We did the musicians, and what I found out with the musicians, they're all right brain.
Yeah.
Most musicians, Bowie, the Beatles, Stones, Barbara Streisand, none of them could read music. They were reading
Mm,
music is left brained, and they're all
mm,
right brained. And you have them having songs like Paul McCartney has his dead mother, come to him and said, "It'll be okay, let it be," and then he writes the song "Let It Be." Mother Mary comes to me in times of trouble and stuff, and you get these bizarre sort of crossover. So the question I have for you is, we've found in the paranormal, we start with UFOs and all of a sudden you're getting a download and then this happens and this happens. Do you have other paranormal stuff happening in your life that seems to not related, but
Mhm.
but that's what I seem to, it's almost like when you rip the veil, everything else starts coming in, you start having all
Mhm.
sorts of other experiences besides channeling.
I um I had a ghost cat appear in my hotel room when there wasn't supposed to be a cat in there. I could feel it crossing the bed across my ankles and come up, sit next to me and meow. And it seemed to have a green glow around it. It was in the hypnagogic state, hypnagogic
Yeah.
state. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. And so, that it felt, alien, um, extraterrestrial, and it scared the bejeebers out of me. So there was that. Just for the record, I've always had really good musical sense. My dad was a musician, and I'm not a musician. I'm married to a musician, and music is a really important part of our lives, and we listen to a lot of it. But I have a good ear, and I'm very sensitive to it. I've always been super sensitive and emotional. I think I might be on the autism spectrum. And that would explain a lot of the troubles I've had in my life, because I've always been different that way. And I never really knew why, I think, until I discovered my abilities. And they made sense. And, people who are sensitive now have books on how to manage the input from people and energies. And so I'm able to do that now. Um, I can't, I may have heard voices in my head, at a younger age. That's a channeling ability too. Um, Joan of Arc heard voices. Just, I'm going to tease you a little bit for more, to get more intent information, but the people who hear voices are the ones who are the reformers in the world. So if so if you're hearing voices, chances are, maybe you'll command the armies of France, or do something else that is, taking something to the front lines. They're not great at like picking up the pieces after things have been unformed, but they will lead the charge on things. So there's a whole correlation between people's weird experiences with their intent in life. So that's just something. But despite that, I'm, even though I'm not of that intent, I think a little bit might have been coming through at an early age. I was hearing voices. Other than that, I can't think of anything really that I'll probably think of something
Yeah.
after we're done talking.
Yeah, you get these bizarre things like you're talking about Bowie. Bowie edited a UFO magazine when he was in
Oh,
England.
wow. Wow.
Claimed he was seeing, I
Yeah.
guess that maybe you can throw, was it 16 UFOs a night he was seeing, and
Wow.
he played in The Hunger. Played in a movie called The Hunger, which was written
Yes.
by Whitley Strieber, who wouldn't have his abduction experience for another 5 years. So
Oh,
you have these
wow.
synchronicities where you're like, what's the chances that he's in Whitley Strieber's movie when he's doing horror fiction movies and stuff like that? And you get all these
Yeah.
things. So the question I would have for you is, do you think it's planned? This whole idea, do you think you planned to come in the world and this was your objective? And
I do. Yeah. I think we all have a plan, but not a plan that's like cast in concrete. There's a lot of variations on the theme for us to choose to experience. And there's a lot of different fulfilling things that we can do. So yeah, I would say there's a soul's design for expression, called intent, and that we can find out what that is. We can get helpful information. That's one of the things that Rose and I do. And our book, The Way of Spirit, talks a lot about intent. And there's stuff on my website, thewayofspirit.com, also for free. So we can sort of, with help, sometimes we can tease out what those things are. When I found out from Seth about these, and Ilda is the name of the family. They're the ones who are interested in the extraterrestrials and all that. And I'm of the Ilda family. They like connecting the dots. They're the exchangers. They exchange information across boundaries. There'll be the one in the marketplaces. There'll be the ones talking about ETs, and all of those kinds of things. And Seth describes them as often being jesters and courtesans. And because jesters tell the king what the common people are thinking, because someone has to, right? And courtesans, they exchange information in courts and so on. It was so funny because I had two works of fiction going on, one focused on a jester and one the main character was a courtesan, so those things happen all the time with me. And I just wanted to mention too, and we talked about this a little bit, but I met someone randomly last year who is involved in the UFO discussions, Jim Semivan at a
Oh, yeah, yeah, you mentioned that to me.
right.
Yeah.
And so here we are, and there's a connection with you. And so it was just totally synchronistic that I met him at a friend's dinner party. And so he'll be a neighbor actually one of these days soon. So
Oh my
yeah,
goodness.
yeah. And I happen to have come across David Jacobson, who's a historian, right? And wrote
Mhm.
some stuff. He's
Yeah.
a Temple University professor that I interviewed in my youth about people who believe that they've had abduction experiences, So I was doing a paper for sociology. So all of a sudden I have these wonderful connections with people who are exploring this stuff quite
And
accidentally.
and you
And
mentioned Jim knew who you were, right? Or he knew what you did?
no, except that I brought my Starman book with me to give to the hostess, and he took a look at it, and I said, I don't know if it's really for you because, you just told me you're interested in, UFO phenomenon. And he said, oh no, I'm interested in consciousness. So I thought, oh, that's going to be an interesting conversation when I get to have it.
Oh, you'll have to
Yeah.
let me know if you get it. If
Yeah.
you've seen his bookshelf, I mean, he's got a bookshelf that's about 3 times what you got. It's like
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
reads everything,
Yeah.
and he understands is he calls them the others, and he says just because you got bodies and crafts doesn't mean you know what's going on. He's on this whole thing. In fact, his famous expression, I quote him all the time. He says, "There does not appear to be any there. This
Mm,
seems to be on the edges of quantum physics and consciousness." And
mm,
I would be long dead and gone before they figure this thing out. So everybody
mm.
figures it's all figured out, and Jim Semivan knows. No, it's a little more complex than people are once you get
Yeah.
into it. And he had the experience with the beings in the room, and 30 years later, he's still upset about it, and he's trying to figure out
Yeah.
what happened. And the guardian type being that was behind him had this guardian type thing going on about it,
Mm,
which made me think soul guide. I mean, it's a soul guide. So
yeah.
interesting that you're have as many conversations with him as you can because
I will. I
he's very,
definitely
very
will.
knowledgeable and very open. I would trust
Yeah.
everything he says. He's very open about what he believes and what he doesn't believe, and very, very smart guy.
Yeah, he
That's good.
really is and really nice guy too. And I mean, I'm hopeful that there will be a lot of things uncovered in our lifetimes because as Seth predicted, there is a shift in consciousness happening. He says it will be achieved by 2075, which we won't be around in our lifetimes, but we're seeing a lot, of things changing, and AI and the extraterrestrial explorations are huge things, that are reshaping our consciousness.
And an obvious question, I think you would probably agree. I mean, in your experience as you go through this process of learning and developing, does it get more complex as you go along, where you have more awe and wonder about the world in terms of, I didn't know this was possible, that was possible. It's sort of like as it unfolds, you start to realize you haven't got a clue what's going on.
I take every bit of consolation that I can that things are going in the right direction. And I apply, the practices that I have to only control what's in my control and turn it over to essence. So more I'm more grounded than I ever have been and more fearless than I ever have been. So when this stuff comes up, I have a core set of beliefs that are helpful, let's just say, for me. And that's why I do what I do, because I want to help people um trade, the not so great spiritual ideas with better ones. I grew up Catholic and I never really bought into the whole thing because it just didn't seem right to me. And so, I've learned to trust my intuition on things like reading that first Seth book, that's the way it really is. And we really don't have to fear so much. And so that's sort of my My credo now is for me to not fear so much and help other people not fear so much, because we are surrounded by loving energies, and it's not all, like Hunter says, it's not all peaches. The idea that everything's going to be peaches is a problem, because we're here to experience suffering too. We want to try to reduce it, and so Rose is really good about providing practical guidance on how to do that, and all of these wonderful authors in my books too. They're all about that, helping us feel better.
Last question, and then Desta can ask what she wants. Is Rose still around? Are you still sort of interacting and getting material?
Yeah. Yeah, Rose is
Writing
always
it down, hopefully.
Yeah, except as Desta was saying, it's really hard to remember what we talk about, because I'll lay in bed and I'll, get her through my fingers. And that's how I can sort of go back and forth. I'll ask a question in my head and she'll come through. She's guiding, she actually says that she's helping to orchestrate the shift in consciousness that's happening now, that you're part of too, there are many other beings helping with this, and so yeah, she's always around. She describes herself as a dream walker, which is what Seth called sleepwalkers that actually help create our reality, and that ties in with the beautiful creation stories of the Aborigines and the dream time, that these beings are dreaming this universe. And so we can tap into them. It's a wonderful area of exploration too. I can't say I know much more than that about it. I don't know how much I need to, but I trust it. I trust that. I trust Rose, but I think it's really important to be discerning. I've been through my discernment. I continue my discernment. I think that's super important with anybody. Yeah.
Desta, have you got anything you want to add? Nothing. Well,
Thanks,
this has been an
Desta.
honor, and I assume that you've had meetings with these people, and when you leave the world, you'll get together with them and say that was a great
Yeah.
journey, and we put this together. So, and I
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing with us because, as I said, I mean, people I think waste a lot of time, in entertainment. In fact, I think I had the highest level source ever on the UFO phenomena, and he said to us, he said, why should we change the rules and regulations to satisfy your curiosity? And for a lot of people, it's just curiosity. They want to go out, like in the old days, they used to have seances. All the rich people would go have seances and talk to dead people. And now everybody goes to do sky watches and they try to see if they can see something in the sky. But I say, the people that are in the veil, that people can pick up the stuff. I think you are some of the most important people in the world in terms of, if you can tap into them, why would you take that off the table? Why would you not try to ask a question and tap in? If this person is getting information that's not coming out of left brain and is going to be more accurate, why would you turn that down? So I really appreciate that you were willing to share, and let your husband know that I would love to talk Seth sometime, because I'm fascinated as you are, and I know Desta is probably fascinated with Seth as well. It's
Absolutely.
And I look forward to future conversations with you both. It's really been great to meet you both. Thank you so much for having me.
Beautiful.
Thanks,
Thank you
Joanne.
very much.
All right.